Thanks for everyone who have just joined us on this exciting discussion. My name is Charles Baudry. I will be your moderator for today. I'm the mobilizer of Consortium Accélérer 2030 pour le Québec. We convene individuals and organizations in Quebec that are committed to the vision of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. This panel is international. We have an audience from Quebec, from elsewhere in Canada, and from the international. Hence, it will be primarily in English. However, we have a wide audience that is also Francophone or Anglophone. Hence, we have a live interpretation service available on Zoom. You can access it by clicking the live interpretation little earth symbol on your Zoom. This event is the kickoff panel of the CIRODD Sustainable Innovation Summit. We're very glad to have an amazing panel of guests today. So to begin the quick discussion on logistics, the webinar will be recorded and we invite participants to mute themselves in order to participate. So welcome our participants, welcome our panelists, and welcome our organizing committee. It's a pleasure to be moderating this session today. A quick thank you note before we begin our panel. I'd like to extend my gratitude and thanks to the organizing committee of the activity. I represent Accélérer 2030 pour le Québec. We have a team with Montréal International, Sustainable Development Solutions Network Canada, University Concordia, and McGill Sustainability Systems Initiative. We are convened by the Sustainable Innovation Summit organized by le CIRODD. And we're very happy that you've joined us today. I'll be introducing our panelists shortly to begin our panel. They represent expertise on sustainability, innovation, research, and among other topics. But before we begin our panel, I'd like to introduce kind of what are the key objectives for today and what will be the process of our 1-hour panel, followed by a 40-minute curated discussion with some co-moderators. Si vous voulez juste de vous joindre, if you've just joined us, as a reminder, you have a live interpretation button on Zoom. Our agenda for today, for the first hour until 2 p.m., we will have our panel. So I will introduce the context, why we have convened with the organizing committee this discussion on the SDGs to kickstart a decade of action in Quebec and Canada. We will hear from our leaders on the topic. We'll have a curated discussion with everyone. And this will be followed by breakout rooms on key thematics that will be moderated by our leaders. We will present what will be the next step by collecting this data and how this will activate an action plan in Quebec. So why are we here? Quickly, we have 3 objectives with you today, both participants, panelists, organizers, scribes. We have 3 objectives. Our first one is that we want to advance progress, collaboration, and knowledge on the SDGs in Quebec and in Canada. And this will be done through the discussion of our panel and through the breakout rooms that will be moderated. We want to foster action-oriented dialogue with you participants who have joined this action-oriented discussion to identify pathways and engagement areas for the SDGs in Quebec and Canada. And finally, we want to collect the qualitative data and the key insights that emerge from our discussion. Our panel will cover 4 key topics, starting with more a context on the relevance of the SDGs as we are currently in a health crisis around the world. We will then look at how to tie our local action, both across our province, across our country, to a global cooperation agenda. We will hear about some case study on how to localize the SDGs during pandemic. And finally, we will talk about the role of research in identifying some gaps as it relates to SDGs locally. As you hear our panelists talk and the different topics of discussion, I invite all participants to identify what topic they would like to work on as we close off our panel. So those are the 4 topics that you will be invited to join at the end of our panel discussion. Our technical team will activate 4 multiple choice window where you can choose which room you'd like to join. So I extend also our deepest thanks to all co-moderators who have accepted to join us and who will be curating the discussion to ensure that we come up with some key action items for the SDGs. Donc, sans plus tarder, I think...
So without further ado...
are clear. I'd like to now introduce our different panelists for today before we kick off the different discussion. I'd like to introduce first Maria Cortez-Push. Maria is the Vice President of Networks at the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. She leads SDSN efforts to build a global network of universities, research centers, and civil society organizations to support the SDGs. The Networks program works with the members of the SDSN and organizing them around national and regional networks.
De réseaux régionaux et nationaux. Ces réseaux visent l'innovation en développement durable.
Degree programs, executive training, and public education, among other things. Maria, thank you for being with us. It's a real pleasure to have you. Our second speaker, Ms. Elizabeth Mrema, is the Executive Secretary of the Convention on Biological Diversity Secretariat. She's been in that role since December 2019, and prior to that, Ms. Mrema served as the Director of the Law Division at the United Nations Environment Program. She has more than 2 decades of experience at the United Nations and brings to her position an extensive experience in global environmental law and policy making, among implementation of environmental and sustainable development programs. Before joining UNEP, Ms. Mrema worked at the United Republic of Tanzania, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. Ms. Mrema, we are delighted that you could join us for this panel on the SDGs. Our third panelist, Monsieur Karel Mera. Je vais continuer en français pour la
I'll now continue in French for the next presentation. So Karel Mera is the President and Director General of the Foundation of Greater Montreal since...
La Fondation aide les individus, les familles, les organisations à s'impliquer dans leur communauté en créant des fonds pour différentes causes sociales dans tous les secteurs. La Fondation du Grand Montréal gère les actifs de ces fonds et guide les donateurs en identifiant des priorités sociales afin de supporter les organismes communautaires. Auparavant, M. Mera occupait le rôle de directeur pour le Québec et les Atlantiques de la Fondation David Suzuki et est également chair du projet de réalité climatique d'Al Gore au Canada. Finalement, il est également vice-président du conseil du parc Jean-Drapeau. Monsieur Mera, merci beaucoup de prendre part à cette discussion avec nous. Et finalement, nous entendrons Madame Janice Bailey. Madame Bailey est directrice scientifique du Fonds de recherche du Québec, Nature et technologie. Elle était auparavant professeure et vice-doyenne à la recherche à la Faculté des sciences alimentaires et de l'agriculture de l'Université Laval. Elle a occupé plusieurs postes en recherche. Madame Bailey, merci beaucoup d'être parmi nous. I will invite our panelists to turn on.
Je vais maintenant inviter nos membres du panel.
To this panel. Maria Cortez, I will begin by asking yourself the first question. In the past 6 months, we've entered a global pandemic around COVID-19. The United Nations has called 2020 a year for a decade of action around a program that was adopted in 2015. My question is, what is the relevance today of a program that was adopted 5 years ago as we recover from a global crisis?
Bon, bonjour tout le monde et merci
Good morning,
beaucoup.
everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be.
I'm going to pass to English to avoid further.
Maintenant passer à l'anglais pour éviter de heurter les oreilles francophones. Je crois que c'est une question tout à fait pertinente. C'est clair que cette année a beaucoup changé de choses pour nous, sans aucun doute. Les scientifiques ont prédit avec beaucoup de précision que si nous continuons à détruire les habitats naturels, nos écosystèmes, et réagirait en créant des pandémies. Et c'est exactement ce que nous voyons aujourd'hui. C'est une pandémie qui a tué plus d'1 million de personnes, qui a...
A pandemic that has shown but also exacerbated the social, the economic, and the financial, and the political inequalities that we have in our societies. We've seen a rise in gender-based violence, in the number of unplanned teenage pregnancies. We've seen many be plunged into poverty. I was reading this morning, 1.06 billion learners have been affected by this pandemic. And not just, I mean, we have seen our land and our forests burn in apocalyptic images this year. I was looking at a platform that we've recently launched called SDG Today that offers live data on SDGs, or close to live data. And let me just give you some numbers to portray what I'm trying to express. So 1,357 populated areas are today considered to be to have poor air quality. We know that poor air quality is connected to cardiovascular and respiratory diseases that kill millions yearly. 636 million people in sub-Saharan Africa live without access to electricity, which is something that we need to keep our food, to keep our medicines. And the International Agency of Energy has estimated that many more are going to fall into this category because of the pandemic. 0.94 billion people are food insecure. And only this week, 54 square kilometers have been deforested. And 681 lakes are suffering of elevated nutrients. So, of course, the SDGs are relevant. Perhaps they're even more relevant than ever. They provide the roadmap for a sustainable future. The SDGs portray a future in a different trajectory. This year has shown that our current trajectory implies unacceptable losses of every kind. The SDGs talk about sustainable cities, about decent work, about quality education for all, about a shared prosperity, about ecosystems, healthy ecosystems that we can benefit from. Let's remember also that the SDGs were defined in a historically participatory approach with millions of people from around the world, from different disciplines, from different sectors, different ages, providing input. And they were then extensively negotiated by member states. So this is the plan that we have. This is a plan that our country is committed to. We do not have another one that brings us to a sustainable future, and we don't even have the time for another one. I think very relevant is the second point of your question. So what is the link with the pandemic and the recovery efforts? The SDGs, in a way, give us a chance to make sense of the tragedy of this year. They give us an opportunity to build back better and to address some of the causes of our ails. The SDGs provide us with the roadmap for decoupling our economic prosperity from environmental destruction. It's an agenda where there is investments in this low carbon economy that can boost the creation of jobs. We know today that the demand, trade, and income, the way it's been affected by the current crisis, is not going to rebound tomorrow. It's going to be affected in the long term, and therefore investments will probably be the main source of economic growth as well as job creation. And there is a huge opportunity of creating jobs in transforming our energy system, in transforming our cities to sustainable cities with smart grids, with electric vehicles, with buildings that are energy efficient. And so, in fact, some countries are already using the SDGs as a framework. I think, well, I know closely the European case because this is where I'm currently based, where the European Recovery Plan is very much aligned with the SDGs. Again, the SDGs offer us the opportunity to build back better and to address the root causes of our current situation. I wanted to just say a couple of words on the question of the multi-stakeholder partnerships that I know is also part of the discussion and connects with what I've just said. The SDGs outline a profound transformation, an urgent and highly complex transformation. Let's think just about the energy system transformation. So the fossil fuel-based energy system was built in the last 200 years progressively with complex and intricate roots in our financial, our political, our social systems. And the challenge is really to rethink this energy system in a timeline of 30 years. So that's the urgency and that's the complexity. Let that not discourage you, because as SDSN has justified, and in collaboration with many other organizations, this is an agenda that is doable. The SDGs are achievable. Furthermore, like we have also demonstrated with the IMF in English, this is also an affordable agenda. However, what we cannot afford is to have small projects that are siloed, that are working, perhaps even being duplicated in other areas or in other places, that are producing small incremental change. This is the time of systemic and exponential change. And to deliver this kind of change, we need everyone. We need people from different countries, from different expertise, from different sectors. We need to work together in networks that have portfolios of projects instead of isolated projects that are learning by doing and learning from each other, and that are identifying opportunities to produce rapid and systemic change. I think this is how we're trying to work in SDSN, and this will be vital to achieve the SDGs, and even more so in the current climate, where we have an opportunity of financial and recovery packages throughout the world that need to go into something else than small projects. They need to be coordinated, and they need to think about systemic and transformational change. This Maria? Is how, yes, I need to be...
No, but I think what you just mentioned ties very well into kind of the next topic, yes, that I wanted to introduce, but you are definitely a very inspired speaker that really sets the tone for how this conversation will continue. So thank you for that overview, and we'll have the chance to discuss multi-stakeholder partnerships in the discussion.
Great. Wonderful. Thanks so much.
But your last point around global cooperation that's needed, For me, it rings a bell that we need to look at how we're leading local action and what is its relationship with our global cooperation agenda if we're really looking at a systemic. The next speaker I'd like to ask this question to is Ms. Rema. Given you've worked for 2 decades at the United Nations, you work now at the Secretariat on Biological Diversity. How do we ensure that our local action is tied to our global cooperation agenda? And what is the role of UN bodies, such as the one that you represent, in accelerating that change?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to contribute to this debate. And Maria has set out very well, think globally, act locally. And these were the words of a Scottish urban planner, Patrick Geddes, in the early 70s, to also highlight the connectedness between the different SDGs, and even further coined the word conurbation to signify human settlements can no longer just be cities or contained in their size, but have spread to the land and to the seascape. And Maria, of course, has talked a lot on that sphere. Where is the UN coming from? UN this year celebrating 75 years of its existence and supporting and working with countries and partners to ensure that human well-being and the planet lives in a safe place. And of course, for me, the CBD Secretariat, biodiversity, nature becomes our Bible. And unfortunately, we are in the state where biodiversity loss is at unprecedented rates in the history of humankind to date, as has been clearly underlined by a number of recent reports. SDG, and again, if I look at nature biodiversity, we have 17 SDGs. 14 of them depends on the contribution to be made by biodiversity or nature. And this is where then, through the UN cooperation with NGOs, youth, indigenous people, local communities working together to really underline the importance of nature, biodiversity, and biodiversity in the achievements of the SDGs. If majority of them, 17, depend on nature to contribute to it, and that means we are looking at the food we eat, water we drink and cook, our own health, their livelihood, their jobs, I mean, all this. And the UN Secretary General just recently, actually last week, recently, issued a brief on cities. And also we have all, I think if you participated at the UN Biodiversity Summit, and as I said, again, the recent reports, including those related to COVID-19, all point to the basic fact that development, health, economy, climate change, biodiversity loss, all need to be considered jointly in concerted, integrated action. It is this concerted, integrated action where UN then also comes in, working with countries, and where we hope governments at all levels collaborate, faring better in a whole of government, whole of society approaches, ensure that innovative participation of everybody, if at all, we have to make a difference. Yes, we have thought globally, put the global systems in place, but implementation action is locally at national level. And this is where all action then needs to be demonstrated. We have witnessed an increasing, of course, coordination of programs and policies across all levels of governments of the countries which have signed the CBD Convention. Of course, it's an encouraging development. Recently, we have seen the government of Scotland, in partnership with us, the Secretariat, other networks, particularly of cities, subnational governments, taking up that leadership and propose through a consultative process, what is called Edinburgh process, which has involved over 350 subnational government cities and experts, and coined what they have agreed as Edinburgh Declaration. And we hope that our ongoing negotiations of the post-2020 framework will benefit such mobilization. And again, this is where I'm saying the UN is there to facilitate, to support the actions, which then, of course, at the end of the day, depends on actions at local level, national, subnational, and local level. And in order for the innovation to really play its role and not against, of course, we are looking at SDGs as well as our ongoing discussions on the global biodiversity framework to all work together, because we need the safeguards to be adopted to further support this work moving forward. So the UN is there, and looking forward for all collaboration, collaborative, transformational actions, which Maria is also underlined, so that we work together in an integrated, cohesive, comprehensive manner to really find ourselves getting out of the current COVID-19, but more so long-term preventive measures to avoid future pandemics. Thank you.
Ms. Merma, thank you so much for your intervention. I think you mentioned a lot the role of local institutions, of local governments to play in implementing UN efforts. The government of Canada has unleashed its national strategy for Program 2030 recently, which really helps to guide organizations in Canada to adopt a preliminary plan. One of those organizations who's been really active on the SDGs is the Fondation du Grand Montréal. Fondation du Grand Montréal a publié, sorry, I often switch to French naturally. The Foundation of Greater Montreal has recently published its Vital Signs Report 2020. You're one of the few foundations that is explicitly aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. Karel Meran, thank you for being with us. On what you've seen or observed in the past 6 months in the philanthropic sector, and what is the role that the SDGs can play to build back better?
Thanks, Charles. First of all, I have to say I'm very happy to be here because I started my career as an international consultant working with UN agencies. Then I spent I spent 10 years doing this. And now I'm with the Foundation of Greater Montreal trying to implement sustainability at the local scale. So I've been involved at each level, and definitely each level has a different role to play, because when you work at the scale, like at a global scale, you're going to enable things, or at the national scale, that will allow people to do more at the local level. But ultimately, we have to deliver that where the rubber hits the road is really at the local level. And so we've been faced with an emergency in the past 6 months, and the philanthropic sector reacted by essentially trying to respond very quickly, have a rapid response to the needs of the community. So what we have seen essentially is that the large foundations finding a way in a very short period of time to invest more of their assets. Normally they would distribute 3.5 or 4%. Some of them went to 5% of their assets this year to try to give some oxygen to help people in need. They did it with agility and by trying to work together. So basically, as Winston Churchill said, you know, never let a good crisis to waste. And so the philanthropic sector had to mobilize very quickly, work together. And so I hope it's going to have a lasting impact on the way.
Un effet durable dans le fonctionnement. Parce que si on peut réussir,
that's how you're going to make like a real impact. Then definitely what happened in June in the wake of the George Floyd tragedy in the United States is really a in French we would say prise de conscience. I don't know how to translate that. Like basically an awakening, I guess, to the notions of systemic racism and the importance of giving a voice to marginalized communities within our communities, because philanthropy in the past has been or is still very, I would say, elitist in the way it's governed. Although it is very, I'd say, it's trying to be accessible and it's trying to support communities, it remains a very, I would say, well, elitist kind of governance. And so I think it is that awakening will change the way we govern ourselves and the way we also see ourselves in the community in the future. And I think this will have a lasting impact. And the last thing I would say is you referred to building back better. And so when we published Vital Signs earlier this year, we realized that in the past 20 years, although those 2 decades had been mainly decades of economic growth, but we have seen very little progress on social and environmental indicators in the Montreal region. And that's a problem, right? If our economic system is not delivering on what it's supposed to deliver, then how can we implement the Sustainable Development Goals? And so this notion that as we move out and like move away from this crisis, we need to do better. We need to find new ways to organize ourselves. We need to, build back better. I think it's a critical recognition across the sector that we need to use our philanthropic power to actually have a transformative impact on society, and not only to put, I guess, a plaster on a wound, right? We need to heal our community.
Thank you so much, Karel, and we'll have the chance to come back to the discussion with the other panelists. But this notion of putting a band-aid on the crisis and looking at it through a lens of a short-term issue is definitely a topic that comes a lot when talking about the global framework of the SDGs over the next 10 years, whereas we're focused on solving a crisis that is happening right now. So how do we bring a long-term vision to how we solve our current local challenges, which is basically the topic of our discussion today. But actually, I think it helps well for our next guest, Janice Bailey, who is Scientific Director at the Fonds de Recherche du Québec, Nature et Technologie. We just talked about long-term, having, how do we avoid to put a band-aid on our local challenges right now and think about the future? My question to you is, what role can research play in Quebec or in Canada to help us contextualize the gaps that we need to work on as it relates to the SDGs and as it relates to the common language of the SDGs? And has the Fonds de Recherche taken any steps in that direction?
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the CIRODD and colleagues for this invitation. It's very, very intimidating, and I feel very inspired by to be surrounded by these very distinguished panelists. I'd like to just also say that I'm going to speak here as the scientific director of a research funding agency. Some of the audience might not be aware that the province of Quebec has its own publicly funded research agency, and I'm the head of the Agency for Science, Natural Sciences and Technologies, Mathematics. I also spent 25 years as a researcher in the Faculty of Food and Agriculture, as Charles mentioned, but also my own personal research was in the effect of the environment and contaminants on reproductive health. So I can think about how researchers, or I can speak on how researchers think and how we, maybe where our gaps are and how we can improve things. And I really appreciate having a voice now as a scientific director to change things for the research ecosystem towards achieving the SDGs. So the mandate of my agency is to support research and training in science and technologies, mathematics and engineering as a motor of socioeconomic development and progress for the province. And we know that research is a catalyst for economic, technical, and social development. So it's a good public investment. It's a good investment in knowledge generation, but it's also an excellent investment in terms of training and providing job creation for any economy, and also for the people that are doing the research. A lot of students are the ones that are actually doing this kind of research. So I think there's a lot of studies in Europe and the United States and also here in Canada regarding research being a very good public investment towards solving problems in our society. But I think that what we need to do is always constantly remind our decision makers, our politicians, our elected officials, and even the researchers themselves that that it's our research that drives progress. So we have to change, I think, the way we're thinking. And so, as an example, what our agency has done in the past year, we have now the FRQNT. We now put in as a scientific criterion of every single one of our grant programs the concept of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Okay, so that addresses gender equity right there, but also inclusion, two of the Sustainable Development Goals. So in other words, we have redefined, we're making scientific excellence or scientific criterion be EDI, or equity, diversity, and inclusion, is now considered to be a sign of scientific excellence and efforts to do that. So it's a way of changing the way the research community and research ecosystem thinks. And what we're in the process of now doing, and using, Build Back Better, as Maria said, using this health crisis as an opportunity to perhaps redefine again what scientific excellence is. And so now, as we're updating our programs, we're including concepts of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. So what I would like to see is that our research community starts to think about how their research doesn't just move towards economic benefit, because that's really hard for a lot of researchers to think that. It's very unpleasant for some researchers to think that what they're doing is just to drive the economy, but to think that your research program is going to be moving towards achieving these objectives. I think that's a lot more accessible and palatable for a lot of the researchers. But not only, the thing that's cool about being with the FRQNT is we have a big influence also on the students as well. And so that's changing the way the whole generation thinks. And the trickle-down theory is where I see a gap is often between research and our decision makers in government, like I mentioned before. But where I hope that we can at least see some progress is that as the researchers talk about how their research moves towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, that our elected officials are going to see that a little bit more concretely, because a lot of our governments and municipalities, they talk the big talk, but they don't do a lot of action. And so I'm hoping that our researchers, by including the objectives, the development goals in their research, that can help translate into action at more of a global or a governmental level as well in policy. Did I miss something there?
No, I think it was very detailed and very comprehensive. We have about 12 minutes for our discussion, 15 minutes if we're very short on time before we move to our breakouts. I've had one question from the audience, which was a bit similar to the one I had to the group to open up the discussion. So we've talked about transforming the research industry. That's something was happening there. We've talked about the philanthropic sector, increasing their quota from 3.5% to 5% during the pandemic period. We've talked about the UN Global Agenda, providing the tools to local governments to implement SDGs. And Maria did a call to action that was very inspiring at the beginning. One question we have from the audience, and which is the same as me, is where do we start? Given that we have mobilizing efforts in all sectors of our society, whether it's philanthropy, research, governments, that all want to act to build back better around the SDGs. But how do we ensure that we create effective institutions, basically, which is SDG number 16, through effective and multi-stakeholder partnerships? So I'd like to launch that question maybe in 2 minutes from each of you. Maria, you've been silent for the past 25 minutes, so I think we can start with you.
Thank you. This is a great question. I think there are two things that I will mention. So first of all, and this unites what the previous speakers have said, countries need to do very rigorous long-term pathways. Countries need to really map out what this transformation means, involving the scientific community, as Janice was saying, thinking about the whole agenda, as Elizabeth was saying, and then mobilizing the funding to support the whole transformation. We have been doing this exercise of backcasting modeling to think about if we want to be here in 2050, where should we be in 2030? What are some of the challenges? What are some of the technological gaps that we need to invest on, etc. This needs to be done involving citizens so that, once again, we make sure that this is a transition that is fair and that is not leaving anyone behind. So that would be my first point. My second point is that, once again, I insist, I think we need to work on networks. We need to work in a system of collaboration, and we need to invest in these networks, because otherwise we risk going from the model of funding a little project that, as I was saying before, will not get us anywhere, to the model of establishing an institution. But what we need is that network that has nodes and has connections, and both are funded, so that we make sure that that real exchange and real partnership can happen.
Thank you, Maria. I like the idea of creating an infrastructure of collaboration through networks. I think that speaks a lot also when we talk about clusters, or we talk about other things that are over the long term. So thanks for that point. I'll ask now the question maybe to Karel, given I see your camera is active, and then Elizabeth, Mrema, you can.
Thanks, Charles. I think ultimately, in order to support, what we need is a strong civil society that will play its role and make sure institutions are responsive to the needs of the community. So for the philanthropic sector, I think we do not necessarily advocate ourselves, but we can support, financially support groups that are advocating for policies. And let me just give you an example. The way we fought tobacco and smoking involved research on cancer, and it involved also awareness raising. It involved many education, but it also involved policy advocacy that some groups had to do. Because the reason why now people are not smoking in public places is because we we had new policies that were adopted by government. So philanthropy can support civil society, advocate for innovative policies that will enable solutions for sustainable development. And so I think that's important. You know, a strong civil society, a vibrant civil society will lead to better outcomes down the road. And I think we have a duty to support such a strong civil society. Thanks.
Thank you, Karel. And I also adhere to this point. We need a strong civil society. In January 2020, we had our government of Canada who unleashed a report that 4% of the Canadian population or civil society were aware of the Sustainable Development Goals locally. So maybe my question to Ms. Mrema, in the lens of creating multi-stakeholder partnerships, how can we collectively mobilize civil society to help us achieve our the SDGs, basically?
Thank you. I mean, to me, in terms of involvement, is virtually we have to begin with ourselves. When I say ourselves, I mean, and this ourselves, and therefore looking at the population at large to really be aware of the impacts of their actions on the planet. So impact of the actions on each and every SDG, for instance. In our case, we'll say impacts of our actions on biodiversity, on nature. We need to get that awareness first before we get everybody engaged. 1, 2, we need everybody in the society to be engaged. Of course, the civil society can be engaged, but they cannot be engaged alone if the political will is not there. We need the political will. We need the governments to create an enabling environment for other stakeholders like civil society and other networks to be able to operate. We are saying, even with the pandemic and the biodiversity loss, solutions are on nature. Solutions are also, let's say, on payment for ecosystem services and the like. So if solutions are on nature, we need also to get the private sector on board, because we also know what the private sector, the industry, the business has contributed to biodiversity loss. When we look at issues of deforestation, land degradation, agricultural, intensive agricultural production, livestock production, infrastructure. So we need them to be on board so that their own operations also need to look at, be more greener and sustainable, and move away from also, again, looking at governments, moving away from unsustainable subsidies. When we have over 500 million per year spent on fossil fuel subsidies and not on greener, sustainable biodiversity, so, or nature. So again, we literally need everybody because they have a role to play. Finance, their grants, the loans, the credits, are they looking at where those investments go? And they already know now $4 trillion per year accrued from nature. So they have also a business at stake. They have an interest to continue to operate. We need the youth. The youth are the leaders of tomorrow. But then we take decisions today which will be implemented by the youth who, when all of us will be gone. So we also need them to be on the table in the negotiations to play a role and understand that the decisions which are being taken today, they will be the ones to pay the debts, to cover the cost and implement. So everybody has a role to play in the context of that individual or sector or group coming from. It's civil society, it's business, it's finance, it's indigenous and local communities. These are the custodians of the land, the traditional knowledge, which has proven to be more sustainable than our infrastructures of today. So we virtually need everybody and not just civil society. Thank you.
Merci pour la réponse très détaillée. Talking
Thank
about
you for this very detailed answer.
That we have a lot of relève from Quebec who are present on the call, representing the young community of the World Economic Forum, representing various universities. So definitely, I'm also happy to be representing youth on this panel and to be active in those communities. I'll ask a last question. I think this conversation could last the entire afternoon. Fortunately, we have breakout rooms to make some deep dive into the different themes. So what we just boarded around finance, the private sector, we do have a section on economic recovery and the SDGs. And so I'll ask a last question to Ms. Bailey before explaining what will be the process for the breakout rooms. But Ms. Bailey, I've been receiving a lot of questions in the chat from probably researchers or research-related questions around, mostly around how can we help researchers activate, integrate the SDGs into their research, basically. And apart from the equity, diversity, and inclusion component of your strategy, are you also planning to have the SDGs as a core component? You're on mute.
Yeah, I was like a novice, like I've never done this before. That's a great question. And in fact, just this week, we are talking about how to incorporate the Sustainable Development Goals in the preamble, or as part of the justification for some of our for all of our research projects. And my own vision would be that every single, again, proposal would have to somehow address how the research will contribute to achieving these goals. And this is not, something that every single person or every single project will do in the same way. Some of them might be a very, much further back. Some might be a lot closer. But the point is I want to get people to change their philosophy about doing research so that it addresses these goals, because it's a big chunk of our population, the youth, and including the youth, as Elizabeth mentioned, that will keep this thought processing as we move forward. It's a little bit like, I think it was Carol was talking about smoking. It's like a philosophical change. When I was a kid, people still littered. They threw tissues and stuff on the street, but I can remember as a child learning not to do that. And so if we can start now with the youth, with the researchers, and also provide that incentive to as a funding agency to say that, part of your research needs to address these goals, I think that would be good. And the FRQNT, we already support an awful lot of research that would go very nicely towards these goals. And to get to Maria's point about creating these large networks, well, we already fund. We have a very unique funding mechanism in our province where we support about 35 what we call strategic clusters. And these are multi-institutional centers. The CIRODD is one, in fact, that brings researchers with different kind of axes of expertise to work on one common theme. And we want them to include interactions with knowledge users, to reach out to the public. And that's something that I think that researchers don't do enough, not because they don't know how to do it, but because, again, scientific excellence it's not, outreach is really important and should be redefined as a component of scientific excellence, more so than it is today. Right now, it's not, we mostly just talk about publications, and we talk about how many other grants you've had, how many students you've trained, which are great things, but we also have to, this is public money, and the public needs to understand our research in an accessible way. And we can talk about the current crisis right now in terms of things like wearing masks or openness towards vaccines. If we have false information out there, and the researchers aren't telling the public and the government, frankly, the truth in a good way, things aren't going to progress well. But the more that we can open up streams to proper knowledge and democratize access to knowledge, the better things will be. And that's where we all have some barriers. And I want to say, and just as I finish here, is Quebec is a huge province, and it's very lucky because we have a lot of colleges and smaller universities in regional areas. Toronto or Montreal and Toronto in Canada and Vancouver, I've got a lot of universities, but we have to really recognize the strength and the importance that regional institutions can play as well, because without people everywhere, these sustainable development goals just are not going to be realized. So I think that that's where universities and colleges and academia can play a role as well.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much
for
your intervention. We're already 2 p.m. I'd be motivated to continue this discussion with our extraordinary panelists, but I'd like, before explaining the process for the breakouts, extend a thank you from our organizing committee to have joined this session. I think it was really informative and will help guide our participants and our Quebec action plan on the SDGs upcoming. So thanks again for your participation, and we'll move on to the next piece of the panel. I also want to thank the participants who have joined only for the first hour and will not join the breakout rooms. We will follow up with a survey following the event on the next steps as it relates to the SDGs. And so quickly, we will shortly activate a window where you can join our different breakout rooms. As a recap on our process, we will host a 40-minute facilitated discussion on deep dive around 4 thematics that were touched on during the panel. Once we reconvene to the main session, there will be a short presentation on how this data will be used in the next step. And I will be speaking a little more about Accélérer 2030 pour le Québec. And finally, this will give time to our moderators to summarize in 2 minutes each the main highlights of each session. So as a reminder, all the data will be collected by different scribes in our session to inform next steps on SDGs in Quebec and Canada. And so I will ask now our technical team to come into play, given we have 4 topics of interest. We have 8 co-moderators for those sessions. We have mostly bilingual representatives. However, there won't be an interpretation service into the breakout rooms. And so co-moderators will ensure that voices can be heard in different languages. Once again, for those who will leave, thank you for joining this discussion. Thank you for the CIRODD on organizing the Sustainable Innovation Summit. There are also other sessions planned tomorrow that you can join in partnership with other actors. So I will ask now maybe Asana to activate our survey to join the different breakout rooms. So a recap on kind of next steps. So our scribe, reconvening a next step. Our scribes are currently gathering the key insights on a Google document shared with our co-moderators to kind of identify the key items or key highlights of each session. And so we will ask in about 2 to 3 minutes, starting with room 1, 2, 3, 4, to share kind of what were the main highlights of the session. In the meantime, I have the opportunity to share a bit what will be happening with this qualitative data and next step, and also a bit more about my organization, Accélérer 2030 pour le Québec, which was recently unveiled as part of Canada's National Forum on the SDGs. So this was in May 2020. But we initiated the movement more than 2 years ago with a sort of mapping exercise in Quebec to identify who were already working on the SDGs and who were intending to do it across all sectors of activity. So the consortium unites individuals and organizations who are committed to the vision of the 17 SDGs to guide Quebec's prosperity. Our mission is very simple, but also complex. We want to accelerate the creation of effective and innovative partnerships between governments, private, philanthropic, academic, and plural sectors to position Quebec as an international leader in SDGs implementation. And we have worked with our Canadian federal government the past 2 years to ensure that our provincial strategy was attached with our Canadian national strategy. So just a recap of this timeline. We began mobilization in 2018. We've identified the needs around creating a consortium in 2019. And 2020 is trying to activate some preliminary action steps for SDGs in Quebec and in Canada. I won't speak much about Accélérer 2030, but we've published as part of the UN Global Goals Week, our first activity report. So I invite you to get a glimpse of what is our preliminary action plan. I say preliminary because, of course, the discussion today and the output that's coming out of those breakout rooms will help us adapt action plan for the SDGs in the upcoming years. So you can join our efforts through our webpage if you'd like to know more information. You'll get a chance to see greater details on our action plan, but those are our key findings, and I'm curious to see if those findings also emerge from the conversation that we've had in the 4 breakout rooms. And so our first step in the action plan is to mobilize actors towards a collective action plan, which is basically similar to what we're trying to achieve today in convening many actors. So we'll start with different breakout rooms summary, starting with number 1. Our thematic was how to create an effective ecosystem for the SDGs, and I'll let Amanda Watkins run through.
Hello, everyone. So in group 1, one thing that kind of kept coming up is that there's a need for some sort of national roadmap to help guide folks who are interested in creating these ecosystems and being part of them. And right now we tend to see that there's a lot of localized initiatives and beliefs, frameworks that are specific to different fields or careers. But right now we need some sort of map that'll place all these things together so that it's clear how they're working together. Another thing that came up for our group is that in order to do this effectively and at a national level or even at a provincial level, is to ensure that the diversity of the population is being included in the conversation. So this means, not just including people in the conversation, but also reaching out to people who are currently not part of the space at all and are maybe not aware of these conversations and what's happening. So, roadmap, compiling frameworks, and connecting with the diverse groups.
Thank you, Amanda. In room 2, I think we had identifying priorities for Quebec and localizing SDGs with Karel Méran and Liana Diaz. I'll invite them on.
Yes, hello. Is it okay if I present in French because our discussion is in French and I have my notes? Alors, merci beaucoup. Les conclusions rejoignent un peu ce qu'a dit le groupe précédent parce qu'on se rend compte qu'il y a déjà beaucoup de synergie et l'atteinte des ODD concerne essentiellement de réussir à aller plus loin dans cette convergence de différents secteurs, que ce soit le secteur de la recherche, le secteur social ou l'action directe auprès des villes, auprès des entreprises également. Il y a quelqu'un qui a mentionné qu'il faisait cette approche vers les entreprises qui voulaient continuer de le faire. On se pose la question rejoint les fonds ou les bailleurs de fonds à agir de manière plus synergique également et de favoriser des projets qui soient complémentaires et qui soient orientés par les ODD. Et on souligne quand même quelques spécificités de Québec, le fait d'avoir une forte coalition en faveur du développement durable en général, et ce qui est très favorable et ce qui s'est manifesté au début de la pandémie par un appel lancé par un groupe d'entreprises sur l'opportunité d'une relance verte et inclusive. Donc, il y a diverses initiatives qui ne sont pas nécessairement toutes nommées comme étant liées aux ODD, mais qui peuvent être mobilisées dans ce sens, dans la mesure où on parle d'engagement concret et on définit une capacité de suivi, une capacité de mesure de l'avancement. Donc, avec ces deux éléments-là, il y a beaucoup de convergence à mobiliser en ce moment au Québec, et on invite la société civile en général à être plus sensibilisée, plus forte autour des opportunités de prise de décision comme les prochains plans de développement durable ou autres opportunités de manifester une vision commune.
Merci beaucoup. Cette piste d'action-là est aussi ressortie dans notre groupe, de travailler dans le processus de consultation du développement durable qui est en cours. Donc, merci de le rapporter sur la table. Group 3, Economic Recovery and the SDGs.
Sure, I'll just make 3 points and then ask Leila to add anything. So the first thing that we talked about was the importance of thinking about SDG 5, the gender equality and women, and how they've been affected by the pandemic disproportionately. And that a lot of the investments that are being talked about may benefit men more. I think in construction, for example, we had a representative from the construction sector who noted that part of their work they need to do is to increase the number of women that work in the construction sector. So that can also be part of recovery. One of the second things we talked about was the difficulty of addressing the SDGs and economic recovery when working in silos. So government ministries, for example, that work within their own areas and don't connect across in terms of solutions. And also in terms of researchers working within their narrow fields and not connecting. So there was discussion on the need to move towards more effective coordination in both the research community and government community. The third point that was talked about was the importance of translating the SDGs from that sort of national and international level down to the local level in terms of indicators and solutions. And particularly working across connecting local organizations with national and international organizations to try and bring the SDGs down to sort of a more practical, implementable level. Leila, anything to add?
Thank you, Rachel. Pour compléter, des opportunités pour faire avancer les ODD au Québec actuellement, on a identifié entre autres tout ce qui est la stratégie québécoise de développement durable qui est actuellement en révision. Donc, c'est le temps d'y aller et de mettre la gomme dans les consultations là-dessus. La coordination, effectivement, c'est la mise en œuvre. Hein, c'est là où est-ce qu'on n'est pas bon, là, au Québec puis au Canada. Donc, c'est comment on passe à l'action. On en parle, mais là, il faut faire. Fait que les indicateurs, entre autres, ça nous permet de mesurer des choses, mais il faut surtout se mettre en mode mise en œuvre. Et puis, une façon d'intégrer chacun des ODD dans notre quotidien. On a parlé, oui, de faire venir l'international, puis ça, les bonnes pratiques et tout ça. C'est aussi de maintenir des espaces de concertation. Un peu, on a fait référence entre autres au G15+, où chacun peut entendre les préoccupations de l'autre partie prenante et être en mesure d'intégrer des préoccupations. On veut tous arriver avec des solutions qui font consensus. Des fois, ce n'est pas possible, mais quand on comprend ce que l'autre a comme barrière, on est beaucoup plus habilité à réfléchir à d'autres propositions qui vont faire consensus de ce côté-là. Donc, maintenir ces tables de concertation entre différentes parties prenantes, les stakeholders qu'on faisait référence, et c'est quand même un morceau important de l'équation. Et de faire le lien aussi avec les municipalités. Les municipalités sont au cœur de tout ça, donc toutes les réponses qu'on a données, il faut aussi amener ça aux gouvernements locaux fondamentaux. C'est tout. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Léla. Donc, un point qui revient jusqu'à maintenant dans les 3 discussions, c'est la participation à la consultation développement durable. Merci, Luce, d'avoir inclus le lien dans le chat pour que tout le monde puisse y participer et parler des ODD. En 4e, pour terminer, on a le Room 4, Contribution of Post-Secondary Institutions to the SDGs. Je vais laisser la modératrice.
Merci, Charles. Beth, just jump in if I forgot important point. We had a great conversation, great discussion, very rich. So some of the points that came out are that at the university level, there's a need for more sustainability content in the curriculum. Also, a need for more. There's a need for more room for systems thinking in the curriculum as well. That there may be a bigger role for the professional association in the definition of the training and kind of the requirements. We also talk about the role of the funders or the philanthropic foundation in maybe asking for more reporting on the SDGs from the universities. We did recognize that it is difficult to make institutional level changes in universities. That faculties are the biggest generators, but also the biggest barrier of change, and that we tend to put a lot of focus on the faculty, but there's a lot of other people in the institution that can make change. One of the participants suggests a very good term that I think will be embraced by a lot of us in that group, which is called well-being for all, rather than talking about sustainability, talking about well-being for all, which is a great umbrella term that doesn't tend to be like associated with environment right away. So it's a little bit easier to understand for the various groups in the university, even when you think about HR or finance. So it's a little bit more broad, but it covers a very similar topic that we would talk about under sustainability, but doesn't have this really pigeonhole of thinking about environment when we talk about sustainability. So well-being for all. A very good term. And then we have questions. Obviously, we didn't find answers to everything. How do we manage to do more cross-institutional work, multi-stakeholder work? What kind of framework are in place? And I know it's a big question, and I'm sure a lot of us are struggling with that. But that was definitely a question that was raised, and that we. Maybe if we had a couple more hours, we could have had a couple of solutions, but no, we didn't get to that. Very good conversation, though. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Aisha. Thank you, Aisha. Well, this point, Maria approached it in the panel, how to create the infrastructure for collaboration, which is I think the piece that we're all working towards today. It's great that we're already at 3 p.m. I think it was a concise breakout rooms, a recap. In terms of concrete next steps, there will be a compte rendu or a report on all the key insights from all breakout rooms and some more extensive notes on what was discussed, probably around November, that will be shared with all participants to the panel. So we will invite contribution to this report, and this will be used to kind of put the SDGs as the forefront also in Quebec and Canada and inform our action plans. I also invite you, this was the opening kind of a panel leading to the Sustainable Innovation Summit of the CIRODD, which is happening tomorrow all day. In the afternoon, there is a part for researchers. So I will maybe let Asana include the link in the chat for people who want to register and attend. And on that note, we're at 2:59 p.m. I think it was a very productive afternoon. Thank you to all co-moderators. Thank you to our scribes, participants, and organizing committee, and basically anyone who joined in today. I think it was a very good discussion, and I'm glad to have been part of it. So I'm looking forward to crafting this report, sharing with the participants, and having a cross-sector engagement on the SDGs. Have a great afternoon and rest of the week.